We are live today. We're going to be talking about something that just kind of came to our, well, didn't just come to our attention because we've talked about this before between the two of us, but came into conversation when we were doing a Zoom call last week. And it was an interesting conversation with a client. So we figured we'd kind of share a little bit of our thoughts on it and how we not process the information we're getting, but I guess process the information on the dog and the client. And then that's how we kind of figure out what the best plan of attack is, because I'm sure, as most of you know, there are multiple ways to train a dog and there's multiple ways to resolve a behavior issue. And I think understanding the client that's in front of you and the dog that's in front of you is a huge bonus as a trainer, and even as yourself as a client, understanding what you're capable of emotionally, physically with that dog, and then kind of making a plan from there. So give everybody a little bit of time to join in because I can see the numbers going up here. And if you have any questions, feel free to post. I think I can see them. I'm not 100% sure yet. If you are watching, feel free to say hi so I can see if I can see the comments in my news feed. I don't know, Melissa, if you're seeing anything.
Nothing yet, but I know that usually it does pop up on the side for me as well. So hopefully that works today as well.
Perfect. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting topic. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to chat about. We were just going to do it on YouTube, but figured I'll stream it. I figured out how to stream to 2 places at once. So, like,
look at us getting technologically savvy. What?
Totally upping my game. And if I'm fidgety, sorry, I've had like 10 Red Bulls today. So ignore my like fidgetiness.
Oh, hey, Jay. So yeah, we can see comments. Oh yeah, just more Red Bull, what you need.
I had to figure out how to fix my bike this morning. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And I had a plant problem that I posted on Facebook for. It's one thing Facebook's good for, because I never post on my personal page, really. You don't really either, and I'm like, I have a question about a plant, and I texted it to my sister, and I'm like, actually, I'll just put it on Facebook. I'm sure there's people on my friends list that like plants.
Yeah, legit. I saw that post, and it was like, why does it only grow 3 leaves? And like, everyone's like, repot it, repot it, repot it. And like, I'm the worst, like slightly the worst and slightly the best plant keeper, because like I don't kill them, but I don't necessarily make them thrive. So like I could definitely stand to learn some lessons when it comes to repotting or fertilizing or any of those things as well.
Well, as you know, I'm just learning my plant stuff, so it's all new to me. And every time I repot a plant, it dies. So I'm really scared to repot it, but I got my answers that I needed. So it took a while. So after drinking a bunch of Red Bulls and then writing down notes for our blog, we arrived here today. So I guess we'll start on just a little bit of background of how this came to how this conversation kind of happened without, like, I'll leave out obviously the details of who the client is, but which I kind of thought it was a funny story because a lot of trainers, you know, if you end up watching this, you'll think German Shepherd right away just based on what was happening with the dog, but it's actually a doodle. And the client was having issues with the dog pulling. If they were walking together, the couple, the dog was fine. But as soon as one person went ahead or the other person went ahead and the dog was just with one of the handlers, he would kind of freak out and scream and panic and bark and put on a big fit. He was very uncomfortable with that situation. And obviously with COVID, they've been home, they've kind of done everything together. So totally reasonable that the dog was feeling that way because they haven't really been, if you're going to go walk.
Been a ton of separation.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense. You're going to go walk with your partner. You're not going to be like, hey, you want to walk like 10 feet ahead of me? Like, I don't feel like walking with you today. So forge ahead.
Yeah, you have BO, so stand clear.
So that, for us, I mean, for me, there's multiple different layers, obviously, to it, but there's the only reason we had given the advice that we gave was specifically because of this client, which is really cool because that's what the program does. Like if this was just somebody asking a question and we've never met them, it's like you don't understand the person, you don't understand the dog. So giving the advice makes it a little bit more difficult. I mean, obviously you can just give like a standard regular, description of what they should. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing. Having the relationship with the client allowed us to really examine it more in depth and come up with a game plan that was very specific to their relationship, and knowing our clients' limits, right? Knowing what they're capable of doing in terms of, well, like you said, emotionally, or in terms of corrections, right? That's the sort of thing. It's knowing what they're capable of following through with, and knowing what their intentions would be if they did end up having to give a correction.
Yeah, and that's where it came, like, again, for the issue, it was like, okay, so we could just correct this behavior, not difficult to just put a slip leash on the dog and give the dog a little leash pop and get focused back on handler as he's deciding to start to escalate. But how the client felt about how the dog was reacting, not how she felt about giving a correction, because we hadn't even talked about that yet, but how she had felt about her dog freaking out, the emotions that she was feeling in that moment, is what made us kind of decide to go a different way, which I think it's important to say, if we're not dealing with, because I was thinking about this as we're, before we're going live, about taking the client's emotional, like what they're able to do emotionally and physically into play when you're giving a behavior modification plan. But then it also made me think of the clients that we have who have really tough dogs, and I feel like we have to be on them. It's like we can't deviate. Like, I'm sorry, but like we can deviate a little, but there's some things that you have to do. So I was thinking about that right before we went live. I'm like, wait, so this is going to be super dependent still on the severity of the issues of the dog.
I agree wholeheartedly, because when you asked me about doing this topic and I said good topic, I was thinking about my board and train that I currently have, who's also in our program, right? And I mean, we can talk about that a little more detail later, but just there's no work ethic in the dog. She's happy to eat if she doesn't have to work, but she won't eat if she has to work at all, right? She doesn't use her brain. She doesn't think. So we're finally almost 2 weeks in, and I'm finally seeing a work ethic in the dog. And that's sort of the difference, right? When it comes to that relationship with the doodle, we were like, okay, let's be proactive and let's teach behaviors instead of being reactive and giving a correction. Let's build this dog up, because that's sort of what we felt was the best approach for both the handler and the dog based on the situation, knowing our client's limits. When we have tougher dogs like that, even though we maybe have expectations that that is the case and they can't deviate from the plan, sometimes in situations where we feel like they can't necessarily follow through on that, that's where we end up in a board and train scenario.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess for me, I'm not a huge fan of doing the board and trains, but that's just my personal thing. It has nothing to do with the success of a board and train or anything. But that's definitely where you'd go, okay, so you're not able to do this. But then there's also been times where, like, for example, like I'm just picturing one of the dogs in the group where, she's having a hard time creating the dog. And we're kind of making it like you need some confinement in this dog's life. Like, it's non-negotiable. Confinement isn't only to, it has nothing to do with just creating your dog. It's like, it builds like desire to be social with the handler. You're limiting, if you're able to manage the environment, you're limiting failure in the dog, how the dog accesses space, knowing they can freely access it versus they have to work for it. So creating is a huge part of specifically, which dog I'm talking about, but creating is going to be a big part of it. Doesn't matter what trainer you use or what program you use, confinement will get you there faster. And I was thinking about that, of trying to find a way to make it simpler for her, because emotionally she's having such a hard time seeing her dog in a crate. And I'm thinking, okay, so technically, sure, like if I wanted to find a plan that would work specifically for her, could we remove the crate? Could we remove confinement? And I'm thinking, absolutely you can, but imagine the time you would have to spend to build this dog. Like, if everything was so reinforcing and it just got reinforcements from everything constantly that wasn't you, it gets tricky.
And we have one example of that, but that's not our first example of that in, our history of training dogs, and won't be our last, I'm sure. There's so many clients who confinement is a major issue emotionally, right? So, and I think it kind of taps into too why we get dogs, right? We get dogs because they're filling some hole for us and we want to be able to snuggle them and love them and cuddle them. But when we do end up getting a more challenging dog who can't handle that sort of freedom, then we end up putting ourselves, I guess, in situations where either our dog has to be, crated more and we're emotionally damaged by it, but the dog doesn't actually have any emotional damage whatsoever. Or the dog is maybe practicing behaviors that are really not great for their well-being because they're not being contained, right? So I think it's just interesting to see, yes, we can come up with a sort of specific action plan, but at the end of the day, sometimes with those tougher dogs, like you said, it's in the dog's best interest and the people's best interest to really get through to the point that, yes, we can come up with a long goal way to do this, but sort of that short-term pain, long-term gain is a relevant saying in that situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think putting it out there, it's, when we talk to clients, I think we're an open book about it. I think with the tougher dogs, maybe not so much, only because I don't know why, but with the tougher dogs, I don't feel like I'm giving them a huge amount of options, as opposed to the easier dogs. It's like, hey, okay, so we could do it this way. We could do it this way. There's so many different ways that this can play out because your issue is not super serious or super dangerous. And then I find with the tougher clients, I'm not having those conversations. I'm having more of a conversation of, okay, so we need to be successful, as opposed to the easier dogs. I'm like, okay, so being successful is a little part of it because your dog behaviorally is just super sound. So it definitely, putting out the plan seems to vary, but it's always trying to keep the client in mind. But at some point, if safety overrides it, it gets really hard to do that.
Definitely. I think especially out with those more powerful reactive or aggressive dogs, right? And I mean, not to go back to the board and train situation, it's not to say that I don't think the client could do it. And I know you're saying like, I don't so much like the board and train aspect. For me though, I kind of look at it like when you send your kids to like a babysitter, how they're so much better for someone else than they are for you. Sometimes to get some of those really, really basic foundational skills ingrained in a dog, or just to build a little bit of a work ethic in someone else's home, is going to be super beneficial for that dog. And that's like very rarely do we find we need to do that, right? Like when it comes to this dog, do I think the owner could do it at home by themselves? Yes. But I think the emotional toll, so like basically what we train with food as a currency, right? So if you go to work and you don't do your job, you don't get paid. And this dog specifically, I mean, I offer her kibbles and she spits them out, right? She's like, no, I'll get paid later. I'll get paid later. And I think there's a certain aspect of, well, I'm not going to give in because I'm the boss. I'm the dog, like I'm the dog trainer, I'm the boss, the same equivalent. So if you don't do your job, you don't get paid. Whereas I think there's a little bit different. It's almost like with the dog, it's like grandma's house. You know how like everything flies at grandma's house? Yeah. So if you don't do what you're supposed to do, well, then it tugs on grandma's heartstrings and she can't handle it. And eventually she gives in and she ends up feeding the dog for free, right? Because calorically the dog needs to be to eat, right? Or so people think. But the thing is, the dog won't starve. And what we actually end up doing is we're prolonging bad behavior. So I think that's the big thing when it comes to those tough dogs, is really getting that relatable, people being able to understand that the quicker you rip that Band-Aid off and stop being emotionally attached to your dog's caloric intake and just recognize that that's a currency. And as soon as they have a work ethic, they're going to work for that food. And we're never withholding the food in a way. It's like we offer the food. We are offering the food, and the job is not big. It's basically like, be with me, be in my space. Don't try to eat me.
Yeah, step one is just like, look at me and I'll throw you some food. Not even look at me, just be with me.
Be in my general vicinity, and, don't be trying to pull at the end of the leash to get away from me. And I mean, be hungry, try to have a snack, try to work, like try to do something. And I think it's interesting to see, like, I think that grandma analogy, it's one I'm probably going to use more frequently, because I really feel like that's sort of the relationship a lot of clients will have. You get clients who have that, parent-kid relationship where they're like, no, tough luck, kid, you're gonna work or you're not going to eat. But I think a lot of times, especially with these tougher dogs, you see their emotional state, and they are the way they are because they are practicing bad behaviors, and they're generally speaking, the dog's emotional state or mental well-being is not great either, right? They're a dog who suffers from anxiety, or they're a dog, whatever. And so I think that the people then, they empathize with that and they feel bad for that, instead of recognizing that it's somewhat of a manipulative behavior, because they recognize that if they hold out long enough with no work ethic and don't show any improvement, that somebody's going to cave and grandma's going to feed them.
Yeah, it's tough. That is definitely a tough one. And I think, I mean, actually, you know what? We haven't come across it that much in the program.
No,
hardly at all. Like 1 or 2 people maybe out of 100 is not too bad. I've definitely come across it way more in privates than I have in the program. But that being said, everything is there. The troubleshooting on, you know, how to build food drive, food games, like everything you really need to understand why it's so important is in there. So maybe that was just.
I think that daily accountability is also there, right? Like everyone's posting videos daily. Everyone's asking for feedback daily. Whereas with a private session, you're meeting once every week or 2 weeks, and you fall off the accountability wagon sometime throughout that week, right? Like not always and not every client, but I'm saying I see it more frequently in a private session scenario.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's cool. I thought the topic was neat. I mean, I know we've deviated from it, but I just thought
it all sort of ties back in still.
Oh yeah, definitely. It all applies back in. So I think it's just very interesting to watch people kind of navigate through and seeing the person come out more than the dog. So it's just kind of shifted a lot of stuff on how we're presenting options to people and really understanding their limitations and their dog's limitations as well. I mean, when we're talking about thresholds, understanding a dog's thresholds, which you hear us say a lot, it's not just understanding what their limitations are, but understanding what a client's limitations are as well. Like I'm not going to take a super aggressive dog, you know, who has a history of attacking people and dogs and, you know, tell a client, okay, yeah, I'm going to off-leash e-collar train this dog. Like there's just certain limitations that you need to understand with the dog that you have, and then understanding it with the client that you have. And if a client is wanting to take the path of resistance and take as much time as they need, it's our job to still give them that plan. I mean, we can present it in a way that like, okay, so this is going to take you this long. And if you do this a couple times, it'll be super quick. But if we can, it's our job on how we present it to that client and they decide. I think it's only fair. Like if I hired a dog trainer, it depends on where I was with the dog. I would want to know, okay, so which way am I going to go? Like just present me the options here, because it's not black and white. There's a million different ways to do one thing. Like my dog is charging out the front door. Like, okay, am I the kind of person who wants to take all of these steps to teach my dog to not charge doors? Or do I want to just stop it and then work from there? Yeah. So, but I think it's important that we present all of those options because we don't know what kind of client is in front of us. That being said, I always present the path of least resistance and the time, because I just know that long-term it's more beneficial than just, you know, heading out there and stopping a behavior.
Yeah, it's one thing to extinguish a behavior. It's another to take the time, because when you take the time, you also build relationship, right? There's so much in the way of the path of least resistance where the dog is making the choices. And I think the thing is too, like you hit the nail on the head when you said the concept of thresholds. And we know how we pay attention and we talk so much about dogs and not putting them above their threshold. We have to do the same with our clients, right? If our client, if we tell them, you know, here's what you have to do. You have to crate your dog all the time. You have to make them work for every single meal. The only time they come out of their kennel is to work, you know, blah, all these things, like this really strict protocol. If that puts them above threshold in the sense that they're no longer willing to work the program, right? Like they're like, they no longer have faith in the program because they're like, this doesn't make me enjoy my dog. Well, then we need to find a solution, right? So we have to come up with ideas that maybe take a little bit longer, aren't jeopardizing safety. That's number one, right? We have to make sure that no matter what we're doing, especially if we're working with dangerous dogs, we're not jeopardizing safety, but we have to be mindful of our clients. Exactly as you said, like it's this threshold concept. We have to, as dog trainers, we are very familiar with that with dogs. And I think sometimes dog trainers tend to forget that with people. There's this idea that there's going to be this one size fits all approach. And there is, to a degree, a one size fits all way. you know, like there is, right? Like there's basically a way of having an effective communication system with the dog, building up a solid foundation of obedience, creating resilient obedience so the dog learns to make solid choices. And then through that, but when I say that, it all sounds super simple, but we can do that in a million different ways, right? So we have a blueprint on how we do that. But at the end of the day, we also recognize that sometimes our blueprint has little scribbles and, you know, jots and changes where we've modified things along the way where we'll still get to that end goal of what we want, but maybe we don't take the exact path for the exact same path for every dog.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, the crating stuff, as soon as we're starting to get into a very serious rehab with a dog, we have those parameters in place because we want to create a successful learning environment. So no matter what, those parameters are in place. But at the end of the day, there's also a lot of activities that they can do with the dogs. So, you know, for example, like if we're trying to take some affection out of the equation because the affection is just fueling the relationship in a toxic way, it's like, okay, so how about this? When you take your dog out, we're going to do conditioned relaxation. Or how about this? Instead of your dog being loose in the house doing nothing, let's show you appropriate play games, play styles with your dog. So I think that's been kind of newer for me in the sense that I know that you can accomplish it without doing those things. So I never really had to think outside the box to do it, to accomplish, to fill a void that a person is having. So if you're doing a board and train or you're doing private lessons and you can see your client is like really missing that connection, like they really need to pet their dog in order for it to not to be toxic. It's like, okay, so let me teach you when and how you can do this every day and how it can actually work for you long-term, naming a behavior in a state of mind.
Agreed. And I think this is a little off topic, but I think it's kind of interesting how an online training platform created a deep connectedness between us and our clients in a way that I don't necessarily think I felt it with certain private session clients for sure, right? Where you have a deep connectedness with them and you feel like, you know, if they have an objection to anything in the program, they'd be willing to come to you and whatnot. But I feel like the way that we've created this community online and how we meet with them weekly doing these lives and, you know, I feel like there's a certain element of vulnerability where people are more apt to be more communicative and effectively communicate their concerns with us that has forced us to kind of jump outside the box and come up with these more creative ideas, right? Which, I mean, at the end of the day, like I have goosebumps right now because it's making us better dog trainers. We are learning to, you know, we are learning to modify that blueprint to get to that end pathway, to get to that end goal, but still, you know, we're changing things up, but not in the way that it's not successful. You know, we're not changing things. We're not deviating to the point where, you know, a client's saying, well, this doesn't work and we have to deviate and then we're not going to get to an end resolution. No, we're coming up with solutions that will still get us to that resiliently obedient dog. But we have more communication, I feel, from our clients in this online platform, which seems so counterintuitive, right? You think online, you're disconnected, but I think there's a certain element of it that we've created an online community where people actually are feeling comfortable and vulnerable to openly communicate about their issues. So it's really, I don't know, it's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I love that the most because when we were, you know, like a client posted a video, and that's the other thing that's so cool about it, right? It's like somebody has a problem. It's like, oh, show me, you know, like post a video, like, let me see what's up. You know, and they'll post a video and their dog's like tugging on the leash and you could see like just major frustration in this dog. And, you know, the first go-to is like, hey, does this dog tug? Like, it's not even something that's in the program yet, but it's like every time something happens, and it will be like, I'm going to have to add that in there at some point. It's in my note. But, it's every time somebody asks a question of something they're struggling with, it's like, if I didn't see the video of that dog and someone just messaged me and said, hey, my dog, you know, uses the leash as a tug every time we're going for a walk, you're not going to think in your head right away. You're not going to see all this fear and anxiety in this dog. The video posts up, you see all this fear and anxiety in the dog. You understand the client. The client wants to take the path of least resistance just because, you know, she's not going to be believable anyways, you know, like it's a very soft client. So she's not going to be believable anyways if she tries to say no to the dog.
Yeah, so, like your dog's going to call your bluff if you don't have full intention behind it.
Yeah, 100%. So this, this is going to be a slower process because, trust needs to be rebuilt first of all in the relationship because something bad had happened. So there's a whole backstory as to why the dog was even grabbing the leash, shaking the leash, and, looked super evil. And throwing in a tug in there, like we're building to it. Obviously, it's not go for a walk and tug. Like we're going to be conditioning it outside and everything. But I found it, the thinking outside the box thing has to happen a heck of a lot more. And then you're having to put your ideas on paper and then put your ideas in a video and then post it up to a client. And because you're posting it up to 100 clients, it's like, okay, so I'm going to break this down into like the most simplest form ever. So that way, like emotionally, we're not going to be affecting the dog in case, client number 27 reads it, but this is meant for client number 16. And like, ooh, maybe that was too much for her dog. So you got to kind of post it where it can emotionally work for every dog and then tweak it from there. If the client's like, yeah, okay, so my dog's super resilient and doesn't care about this. So now what do we do?
And that's the one nice thing too, I really love about the fact that we have like the 8 units, which are basically our blueprint, right? Like that's the blueprint, essentially. That's like work through this program. And if, you have your generic dog, if you work from unit 1 to unit 8, you should have a resiliently obedient dog by the time you're done. But then there's people who have issues outside the box. And that's where our extra training comes in, right? The additional units where we can say, okay, refer to tug, refer to the leash walking unit where you can practice these exercises, or the crate training. Like, if a dog has a specific area where they're challenged, like, where there's a challenge, then we can refer the client to that. And everything sort of like, it's so different. It's so different for each client, but yet so similar. I don't know. I think it's really neat.
Yeah, it all comes full circle. Like it just, like if you go to every unit, it all comes back to that blueprint. Like no matter what, all the videos and everything we're putting out there, like a client can't go and start with behavior mod because it's there. They got to start like right at the beginning, work through all of the levels before they can even go into the behavior mod part.
Well, that's the thing, right? That'd be a super reactive approach, and that just wouldn't be very successful. The success of the dog long term, like it's one thing to extinguish a behavior temporarily, but you put a dog into a layered stress situation where they're back into a triggering situation, and all of a sudden those behavioral issues crop back up. So I think from a client standpoint, knowing our clients, getting to know them, knowing their limitations and setting them up with kind of specific plans based on their limitations, or not even necessarily limitations, but what they're willing to do it's kind of the art.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I have the same thing. I mean, I know Ran for you is like a dog trainer, like, so you don't have that problem. Like I don't have that here.
Yeah.
So it's for me, I need to adjust and adapt different things. Like if I'm gone and Mike has to do something with the dogs, he is not me and he is not like me. So, I mean, all of my dogs have a marker language of some sort. Like it doesn't have to be, the system of TDO, but all of my dogs have a marker language system. So anybody can come here and drive my dogs. So that's the one thing that I have that's installed, that I was going to have my dog sitter actually take a video of the last time she was here, because of my really, Dooley, a couple of my tough dogs, all she does is break for engagement a few times. And he's like, oh, okay, I know you. I know this language. So like, you're good. Cause my mom taught me that book too. So you must've read the same book as mom. So like, I guess we're friends. So it's the same with Mike, where I don't need to go through all of these things, because if one of the dogs isn't listening, he can just go break. And then they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand this. So the language can apply to anybody. Doesn't matter what you're physically or emotionally capable of. If the language is there, it's there, and it's transferable. And I'm writing a blog about that now, actually, on, can anyone drive your dog? And I've been testing it a lot lately. I took a bunch of videos. I have been having a bunch of friends come over and run the dogs through drills.
Well, that's like you got Ran to work Frankie while we were there, right? Like just to see like how she worked perfectly for him, like no issues whatsoever.
Yeah, I was having her
have a wrong marker, but he used wrong, and she was like, okay, that sounds like something, like she figured it out, right? Because she has a language. And I think that's the really cool thing about having a marker training language like installed in your dog, is they actually like even if the words aren't identical, it's the same as like we speak a language, but if you point at something and you say what it is, somebody who speaks another language would be able to figure out what you're talking about, right?
Yep.
And dogs, they work in the same way. If you have a basic language and you use a word in lieu of another word that, you know, I use versus you use, for example, the dog still can figure out what you're asking. It's so cool.
Yeah, I should make a video on that with one of my dogs, and I'll just make words up so you could see that like, we're still going to be going through the motions. I mean, they have good work ethic and good food drive, which I always maintain. Like, it's just always a thing that I'm going to maintain just because I love it so much. And I mean, I would say out of a 7-day week, like 3 to 4 of my walks are working walks, just because I love working with them so much. So it's very rare that I'll just like slap a line on and go for a walk and not reinforce behaviors that I like. Just because I find it so reinforcing and my dogs find it so reinforcing. So I don't know. I think it's really fun to do. And I think maybe it's just so ingrained in them that no matter who the handler is, like, you know, Frankie might be huffy for a sec because she's got like that stranger danger. But, you know, as soon as I like throw food at someone, I'm like, just say break and ask her to do stuff. Like at the cottage, you know, I sent her the video of like Adam. Oh, that stupid video that I'll never post, but I sent you the video of Adam pretending to be a dog trainer.
Yeah.
And out there, like he's working her, like he got her to do front and spin and was doing like flashy healing with her. She was like retrieving his slipper and, you know, working for him like she was his dog. And I'm like, yeah, it's literally just a language. Like you can communicate to her. She's like, you understand? You speak English? I speak English too. Let's work. Like, so it's really neat. And that blog, I'm really excited to get it up because I think as trainers, you know, we have a hard time understanding, you know, okay, so I'm doing this with my dog. Can we transfer it? Markers in every board train that I've done, I can, if the client understands the markers, like even Roxy, like that boxer I did a board and train with, who you ended up taking, you took that dog and you could drive her. Like right away.
Literally, I took her that weekend and I went to Palooza, that huge dog festival. And I had her like on because you did pedestal work with her. And I had her placed up on a milk carton upside down or like milk crate. And I was getting her to retrieve a water bottle.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And it was like, I just got her that weekend. Yeah.
That was cool. And that's when you can start to see like, of course, relationship and trust needs to be built if you're transferring a dog to somebody else. But you can install a language through a high rate of reinforcement that builds trust in the dog and an understanding. Once they can understand, like even installing a sit, let's say you did 300 reps of sit in 3 days, just sit, break, sit, break, sit, break, sit, break. I assure you that if you have somebody come over, depending on what kind of dog, like obviously some dogs have a higher reinforcement rate of bad behaviors and the history is not so good. So it might be different. But let's say you take like a super neutral, really nice green puppy and you just, you know, paid sit break 300 times. I assure you when somebody comes over and says sit, that dog's brain is going to go, I know this, like good things are coming. And they're going to offer that behavior for a complete stranger because you've installed it in them.
It's especially valuable for those dogs who have maybe some genetic predispositions to be fearful or reactive or anything. Like you have Frankie, who is a bit of a stranger dangery dog, and I have Ahsoka, a similar thing, right? But it's amazing to watch how having a language like that installed trumps the genetic reactivity or the genetic, sketchiness, nerviness. It's not to say that you cure that. You can't change the dog's personality or behavior, like personality, you know, like they're deep down who they are, but you can change how they feel about things, right? So although, you know, her gut instinct says strangers are dangerous, you know, alert bark, let the pack know there's somebody here. As soon as that stranger speaks her language, it immediately clicks that off and is like, okay, never mind, stranger danger does not apply here. This person is safe, everything's safe, life's good. And I think it's just such a really powerful tool to be able to talk with the dogs that way.
Yeah, and temperament, understanding food drive is such a blessing if you have it and super frustrating if you don't. I agree with you because I've done a lot of board and trains where having to build it is extremely frustrating. So I totally feel you, Tracy. I mean, I'm lucky because my dogs live with other dogs. So the need to compete for food, compete for resources for them is always in the back of their head. It's different. Like when you live with a pack of dogs, it's easier. It's like you grew up in a home with 6 or 7 siblings. I mean, the need to fight over resources comes a bit higher. And I'm not saying physically fighting. I'm just saying the idea that you might have to compete to get the last piece of cake is there. So it's easier for me to maintain my food drive with all my dogs. And I can't imagine not having it, but I instill it from the very beginning. So to me, it's not something that I've trained dogs for years without food, and I'll never go back to not doing it. It's just so reinforcing for both of us, and training it's just so much better. So it's something for me that I'll take. Hey, we tell clients, if you're going through the course, if it takes you 2 months to build food drive, take 2 months. Like, I don't give a shit if you're breaking and feeding for 2 months just to like build ignition in the dog. It's so valuable, especially because a lot of the clients have genetically nervier dogs. So when you have a dog with a weaker temperament who's more nervous, several kids, but one dog for sure. I have several kids. Yeah. The kids aren't going to create that competition for food, unfortunately. But if you have that genetically nervy dog, the food is going to help you override that. And I think a big thing people forget is, as much as we want our relationships with our dogs to be enough, it's usually not. It's not enough to just say, okay, my dog trusts me, I'm good. Because as human beings, we are emotional, we are fearful, we are reactive. There's a lot of things that we do that makes the dog go, I don't know if I can trust my mom navigate through this. But if you have a high reinforcer, it's a lot easier. Like, for example, I'm terrified of the night. Like, I hate the night. Anyone who knows me, if Jay's still listening, he makes fun of me all the time. Like, if I hear one creak in my floor, I'm like, holy shit, someone's coming to murder me. It's the first thought that comes through my mind. So all of my dogs are way more sensitive at night because I'm more sensitive at night. So, I could have a trainer come here and go, okay, so how you're emotionally feeling right now is affecting your dogs. Okay, cool. I've been terrified of the night since I was 2. Like, I don't give a shit what you tell me. Yeah. I'm terrified of the night. Like, I can't be brave for my dogs in this moment because I'm super unsure in this moment. But one thing I'm not unsure of is if one of my dogs huff, I can go break, throw food, and they're like, okay, so mom's just being weird because like I'm totally fine. There's no threat here. So I can communicate with them using markers and using food, even though I don't feel safe. They can go, okay, whatever. Like, she's just being weird. So I think that's an interesting topic. And I know we're going like totally in a different way, but I just hear so many clients and trainers say like, well, if you have a good relationship with your dog, then they should trust you and not be leash reactive. They should trust you and not try to bite you when you touch them. And there is definitely a relationship component there, but understanding who you are and the things that freak you out and make you uncomfortable, make you insecure, make you fearful, and being realistic if you can get over that. And if you can't, then find a different training plan that could work for you.
Yeah, that's a really important topic all in itself, right? Like, we could literally do a live entirely on that, and just having like, I think it's like having our dog understand when things are actually threats or not threats, and being able to communicate that. Because the thing is, our dogs are very intuitive when we act weird. And if we don't have a communication system to let them know that nothing is weird, that's when a lot of behavioral issues develop, right? So you have those sort of positive feedback loops. And when I say positive feedback loop, it's not a positive situation. It's just the way that it works, where you go out on a walk with a dog and your dog maybe barked at a dog once because it got startled. And now every time you see a dog, you tense up on the leash because you're worried the dog's going to bark at the dog. And then your dog's like, well, you're acting weird. You put me in fight or flight mode, and I'm on a leash. So here I am fighting because I have no other choice, right? So it's really interesting to see how our behavior definitely has a direct influence on the dogs. But regardless of how we sometimes react, as long as we have a clear communication system, as long as we are effective communicators with our dogs, we can snap them out of those situations and be like, no, this is a me problem, kid. This is not a you problem. This is 100% a me problem that I clearly can't get over, and you're just gonna have to deal with today.
I think that's what I'm gonna call the blog, a me problem.
This is a me problem. I love it. Beautiful.
Cool. All right. So we got to wrap it up because I got boarders here and I got to let them out and bring them for walks and stuff. But
perfect.
You have to do the same.
I'm on my lunch, so I should get back to work. That was a nice little lunch break.
Sounds great, dude. I will chat with you later. Thanks, guys, for joining in. Thanks, Tracy, for your comments.
Yeah, thanks for watching.